Welcome to another episode. Today I'm joined by Moses from Synapse Protocol. So Moses and I met briefly at DEF CON and we had a quick little good chat. So I feel like this is going to be a good conversation. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Arjun. Obviously, love all your content. You write write and talk about some of the best stuff in the interop space. So happy to kind of jam out and chat a bit about interop today.
Awesome. I mean, so let's just get started with it, right? Like how I want to start this is by getting a sense of like your background, how your team thinks about building bridges and about building in crypto. So why don't we start with like your journey? Like what drew you to crypto and how did you get started in this space?
Yeah, so a brief sort of introduction or sort of life arc. I started off like in the startup space. So during COVID, I dropped out of school and taught myself to code because I decided that didn't want to do the trad lifestyle. So I spent a ton of time on chain playing with things, teaching myself to code. I had some brief experiences with crypto before, but mostly like trading stuff, like Litecoin and the stuff that we still don't know how it actually works. But during 2020, I was leading growth at a Web2 startup, grew the company a lot, and then decided to leave because it just wasn't intellectually stimulating anymore. And sort of my origin story is I had met Aurelius in a past life, and ended up going to the AVAX conference in Barcelona in 2022, I think it was. And it was a really fun conference because it was sort of the peak of the sort of like second hump of that bull market. But it was also the time where Layer 0 was launching and there was a lot of discussion around cross-chain messaging and interop. And my first sort of experience with crypto was the trading experience, but at that conference, I had like a lot of deep technical discussions to sort of understand, what's going on under the hood. Fell in love with Avalanche, but also fell in love with a lot of the sort of the builders in the space. And after that, I was like, look, Aurelius, like this is, a once in a lifetime, opportunity. And joined on as the first employee at Synapse then. So that's like a brief sort of arc of kind of how I got involved with Synapse. But I think like for me, it was the tech and really understanding that like, there's actually tons of people, contributing to this ecosystem in a way that is much more technically focused rather than like looking at charts all day. And that excited me a ton.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us go through that journey where trading or just buying crypto gets us into the space. But then around the 2021, 2022 time, there were a lot of infra projects coming up, right? Because there was this whole roll-up centric roadmap. So there were all these roll-ups, then all of these bridges came up. And suddenly there were just like too many new companies in a way.
It's super fascinating because I put together like a small research piece a while ago about sort of the arc of DeFi. And I think I want to say 2019, there were like 5 DeFi protocols, right? And it's like 4 of them we know today, and one is like a defunct Indian exchange because of like regulatory reasons. So like going from 5 DeFi protocols, like mostly all living on ETH, to the ecosystem we have today is like incredible, right?
Yeah. And then, okay, so you were one of the first people to join Synapse. So, of course, you would also have a pretty big hand in kind of shaping up the values and like what drives the team, right? So, how do you describe is like your team's philosophy towards building in crypto? And why did you guys decide to build bridges in the first place, right? Like you met Aurelius at the conference, but then uh, for a lot of teams, the main motivation was that there are just too many chains now, so you would need bridges. So was it something as simple as that for you guys, or was it something else?
Yeah, so quick backstory, I think that helps provide meaningful context. Aurelius and Socrates actually started out building on BSC. They launched one of the first stable swaps on BSC. The protocol went super well. I think this was in early 2021. And the biggest issue at the time actually was there was no way to get your funds to BSC outside of Binance. So you could either deposit from centralized exchange, only Binance, or you could use what they called the Binance Bridge. The Binance Bridge was a multi-sig that took anywhere from 8 hours to 10 days. So onboarding users was like a really big problem, like even, internally. And so at that time, it was sort of like, if you want to, onboard like the next million users, you need to figure out a way for people to move, funds in between different chains. And so at the time we launched, or Aurelius and Co sort of launched like a sort of mini bridge type of thing. And people really, really liked that. And sort of the thought that came out of that was like, wait a second, bridging to BSC is really interesting. But there's also, all these other EVM chains that people have a really hard time, sort of moving funds to. And so this is actually like before Optimism, before Arbitrum mainnet launched. And so by the fall of 2021, Synapse had launched on, the big L2s as soon as they dropped. So anything Arbitrum, Optimism, and some of the other big ones there. So the sort of thought and ethos was just like, as a DeFi builder and as a DeFi user, what are the things that people need? And it was a very clear, we didn't have to do customer research because people are in Telegram and Discord, like, how do I get my money here? So that's sort of, how Synapse Protocol was born out. And I think, that sort of arc has shaped the way that, we have sort of tried to create a company culture and ethos at Synapse Labs. And, so, a lot of that is like very crypto DeFi centric. It's not, a bunch of web 2 developers coming over and trying to learn what is Solidity, etc. It's people that actually just use the chain, right? I think 100% of our team uses the chain like at least once a week, in various manners. Some are NFT degens, some do complex trading strategies elsewhere, but like having a strong crypto ethos is super important. And I think that impacts a lot of the way that we think about things. From we try to be like sophisticated and highbrow in the products that we release, the way that we think about things like security and sort of what are the decentralized types of tools that we want to build. And then also I think that there's other sort of cultural things where like I think the people at Synapse Labs like really care about what they're working on. They work really intensely. There's no mandate that you need to work on weekends, that people choose to do so because they're just already on chain and they sort of believe in the vision there. So I think like everyone really cares about what they do, and that sort of shapes the company culture there.
Makes sense. I feel like that's a story of a lot of bridge teams. Like a lot of the core of bridge teams is based on actual users. Even we would so many times just hire someone from the community because we've seen the person being active in the community. We know he's a user and he understands the product, right? And just like talking about community, you guys have probably one of the loudest communities on Twitter. I don't know if that is just because you guys have a token right now, but like every time I miss out on mentioning Synapse anywhere, they make sure I remember Synapse.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of very loud community members, but we love them all. I think it's so important in DeFi to be in touch with the people that are actually using the protocol, because oftentimes they're behind an NFT profile picture and you have no idea where this person lives, what they do, what they care about. But they bother me nonstop all night long. So I think it's definitely a benefit to have people that are so sort of bought into the protocol.
Well, I think that's an interesting dynamic. I feel like projects that have already had a token for 3 years have a much more vocal community. Maybe it's like back bias from last cycle or something. Whereas a lot of the bridging teams, at least they've launched tokens just in the last 6 months, 12 months. So that dynamic is still building up, right? Like you don't see that with, let's say, Layer Zero or a Wormhole, because the token just went live 6 months ago. So nobody has that sort of like passion for it. Whereas on the other hand, you see Synapse or even a Chainlink, people have been holding tokens for 3, 4 years. So it's a very different, very passionate kind of community.
Yeah, and I think tokens are obviously, people want to trade them and have fun on them, but they're also like a really useful community tool, right? It's a great way to get people engaged, and like I said, a lot of people do this stuff part-time. So when they participate or care about a protocol, like the token is an extra incentive to understand some of the complex things that we're building, or some of the stuff that might not directly affect them. So I'm sure the teams that launch tokens will sort of benefit from that, but there's so many different dynamics there. Like there's also institutional coins where you're like, I have no idea who holds this. Like, I don't know, something like Ondo or something, which feels a little bit less DeFi native, but still has a community created by that token. So it's a really, really useful tool.
Yeah, I mean, especially in bull markets, like you buy first and then research, right? So every time you buy something, there's more incentive to actually go deeper. And I feel like a lot of times people would just go through that whole cycle where they would have bought something in a bull market, but then suddenly the price would have tanked. And then throughout the bear market, they've just stuck around. So they're really passionate about the project. And also, of course, they want their backs to go back up.
Yeah, not a great financial strategy, but definitely a good learning tool. So
I mean, if you can sell at the right time, it's a great strategy. Like just buy first, do your research, and then time it properly. But then like nobody is that good, of course. But okay, so like talking about Synapse now, you guys have done around 60 billion in volume, and like your stats are pretty good. You have 2.5 million users in total. Arguably, you're like one of the most used bridges in the market, right? So in today's ecosystem, how do you guys see your position in terms of other bridges in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I want to first start off by saying like bridging has come so far. Like the early bridges like just sucked, including Synapse. Like they were just like hard to use. It took 30 minutes. Your funds are in the ether. It's unclear where they're at. And now I bridge and it takes max 10 seconds, right, on any of like the top 5 bridges. So I think it's been really impressive to track that arc. But sort of figuring out where we fit into the ecosystem. Like I think there are a couple things, right? One is that like Synapse, I think, is like very DeFi native. It is not, someone's first experience into DeFi. And I think like people like Jumper solve this problem a lot more because they work with the wallets, they work with the exchanges, etc. And so they kind of fit at a different part of the stack. But we sort of cater to the people that are on chain and use DeFi directly through contracts rather than abstracting it or hanging out on a SEX the entire time. So I think like that's sort of one positioning. And I think the second biggest thing is one big theme for us this year was making sure that we just have the best bridging experience. And so for us, like you can measure a ton of different like markers, but for users, it's like speed and cost, right? And if you really nail those two, like those are the core things that users care about. And we've done that, right? I think like today now you're sort of competing at the margins. It's like can you be a cent cheaper? Can you be a second faster? But on all those markers, like we are the best, right? Every bridge will tell you that they're the best, but looking at the data pretty frequently, like we are the most competitive there. And so I think like offering the best bridging experience is the best thing there as well. So there are obviously a ton of other ways that we think about this, like for example, being developer facing, so making it much easier for aggregators to integrate, for wallets to integrate, etc. has been a big focus as well. But I think like nailing the bridge experience, speed and cost, and then two, like building a truly DeFi native experience that doesn't require 10 clicks is like a very non-trivial thing to do. But it's like super crucial, right? Like every day, we hear about at least a new chain dropping and users that want to get there. So that's kind of been, where we think we fit into the larger picture of bridges. And yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you mentioned the North Stars are kind of cost and speed, right? And this is also the North Star for the intent-based design, which a lot of bridges today have adopted. I think Synapse also kind of, I wouldn't say pivoted, but you guys are also focusing on the intent-based design now, right? And the market is also showing that there's appetite for this type of design because nobody wants to wait for like 20 minutes anymore, or nobody has the patience. Everybody wants to make the experience better. Like all this chain abstraction talk or all of these products are also because of the intent-based experience, right? Like one click, it's faster, it's cheaper. So how do you guys look at the intent-based landscape? Because when all of us started out in this space, like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, this design space did not exist, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of teams that are building intent-based systems today, of course, they might have some historical experience with it, but they didn't have experience with intent. So like, how did you guys decide to change positioning and also like the design in a way?
Yeah. So I think like, when you look at sort of what are the axes along, bridge architecture matters to the end user, and then how do you get there? Liquidity-based bridging like doesn't really work that well here, right? Because of like, pricing inefficiencies, slippage, timing. And so there are a lot of different sort of architectural design problems that exist from your sort of traditional liquidity or lock and mint based bridges. And there's some benefits to that, right? It's like a massive sort of design space. But for us, it was mostly, we saw that a majority of volume for bridging happened through like stables and ETH, and that's where most users were sort of using the bridge. And so it's like, how can you make the best experience for those people, and then also create an ecosystem that is aligned sort of with the DeFi principles that we think are super important. Everything from decentralization and sort of anti-censorship and those types of things. So with that being said, intent-based architecture sort of open up the design space for new problems to be solved in DeFi, right? Like you kind of said, like intent-based systems allow for things like chain abstraction to happen, right? A big mantra that we have that I've like written down is that we want to make a sex-like experience, but on chain, right? And you can't have that with sort of traditional lock mint or liquidity-based bridging. So that's sort of how we kind of ended up on, we need to build an intent-based architecture. And then there's, obviously a bunch of, sort of iterations and, learnings that have come from that, right? Like figuring out how to like get diverse asset support, or how do you do canonical asset bridging on intents, or how do you onboard 50 relayers and create a really competitive ecosystem. Like that problem set is very different from figuring out how to reduce the amount of confirmations needed in a lock mint bridge or something like that. So I think like just from a flexibility perspective and user experience perspective, intent-based architectures are sort of where the forefront of bridging is today. And we want to be there.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, so a lot of bridges are doing this, right? Like Across is already there. Relay has been is becoming more and more popular. And any new bridge that launches with this design. So there's a lot of competition now. So how do you see yourself just like standing out? I mean, of course, everyone would say we want to be cheaper and faster, and like, but the thing is, something as simple as branding also helps a lot in this intent-based design space because there's not a lot to choose from. Like at the end of the day, the solvers could also be the same at one point, right? So how do you guys think you will stand out at the end of the day?
Yeah. So I think there's two different ways to look at this. One, from like a branding perspective, I think sort of the unique value proposition for intent-based bridges, like at one level becomes order flow. Like, can you attract the order flow? Do you have the users? And that is more of a product question, right? Like, are you integrated into wallets? How do you, what does the brand look like, and how do people feel about the security or the trustworthiness or, trust in the team, things like that. So there's an order flow perspective, which I think is part of a branding exercise, but also like a integration things. Like one thing that we're doing is like trying to integrate into as many aggregators as possible. And oftentimes this is like, an aggregator that I've never heard of that is somewhere in Southeast Asia, like a market that I'm, a little bit less familiar with. So that's like sort of one path of differentiation. I think finding new sources of order flow and really being the best and winning those sort of auctions when it comes to comparing bridges. The second one that I think is a bit more nerdy is like the architecture. Because there's intent-based architecture, like the thing that a lot of people are launching, but every single one looks different. If you talk to a relayer, they will explain to you how complicated it is to sort of like I guess mess with their code to apply it to a new intent-based system. But there are a lot of sort of competitive advantages and sort of trade-offs that these different ecosystems face. And so, for example, one thing that we think is super interesting is sort of opening up the sort of complexity that intent solvers can actually offer on our architecture. And so something, example of this is like, can a solver offer, bridge and stake or, more complex sort of DeFi actions to really start building that chain abstraction sort of experience together. And that's something that we really haven't seen done well yet. So I think there are architecture things as well that sort of stand out, but it's a large trade-off space.
I mean, makes sense, right? So maybe we can also just start getting into the products at this point because, like you mentioned, the generalized intent, right? Like swap and then stake or like bridge and then stake. So there's a SynapseX, that's the intent-based product. So you can use that for cross-chain bridging. And then you guys also launched the intent network, like Synapse Intent Network, and that's the one where you're saying there's a bigger design space because I think it's not first come first serve. There's like some different type of auction mechanism, and also like you're trying to onboard solvers that can do more than bridging. So they can do probably swap and bridge, or like they can do bridge and then stake or something, right? So these are the two or three differences I feel like that you guys are pushing for now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like, all these products end up feeling like one experience to the end user, but they actually sort of have different mechanisms and offer like, I think like unique sort of experiences that are unlocked by those different products. Like for example, SynapseX is sort of this product that allows cross-chain bridging, but specifically taps into external liquidity to allow that. So for example, there might not be a like Frax pool on Synapse, right? So there's no sort of liquidity pool for Frax, and there's also no Lockman bridge. So for a user that has Frax, they would have to swap into USDC, bridge that, and then swap it back into Frax on the destination chain. That kind of sucks because now instead of one transaction, it's three. And so basically what SynapseX allows is say, hey, Uniswap actually has super deep liquidity for Frax. We're going to swap your Frax into USDT, which allows the solver to bridge it. The solver can bridge it, and then you can end up on the destination chain also swap it. And so that sort of gives you like an any-to-any asset bridging dynamic while not having the liquidity as a core part of the Synapse protocol, right? Part of our thesis is just that like DeFi is really sort of matured at this point. And so we're not going to beat Uniswap on, liquidity pools, right? Like that is the thing that they do really, really well. So leaning on them to build that into the product is super helpful for a user. So that's like kind of one example. And I think the second half of that is like what we've tried to do with the Synapse Intents network is to sort of increase the design space for solvers. Right now, most do same asset bridging, and that asset bridging is limited to like I will say like 4 to 5 assets, and this is like across different like there are a couple of newer intent networks that offer larger asset support, but like across and dbridge being the other two big ones there also sort of have limited asset support, but enabling that design space to incorporate more assets, but also say, hey, now you can bridge and stake. Now you can bridge and deposit into the specific position. Becomes something really interesting because I hate clicking 10 times to deposit things. Like something I often like start some of my like BD calls with is like bridging sucks and I hate bridging myself. I just want to trade on Hyperliquid. I just want to, move my funds around Aave. And so allowing users to do that in one click is the desired experience, I think. And that's sort of what the Synapse Intents network allows for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the end game for intents in a way, right? Like this design language or like this design philosophy was brought in for swaps first and then extended to bridging. And then I feel like eventually it will be whatever you're saying right now, like generalized actions on chain. But uh, this is also like very new. There are not enough solvers to actually pull it off. So it's pretty interesting how it would unfold, right? Like, will it be just one solver that does the swap and bridge and then the third step? Or will it be like specialized solvers? And to be honest, like I think nobody has the answer right now because you can say that okay, I know the answer, but we're not seeing live examples. So unless we see actual implementations of this and like we understand how much does it cost and can solvers actually pull this off, there's no way to actually know the right answer at this moment.
Yeah, it's way too early, and I think that's what's so exciting about this is that like there's so many new things that we haven't tried because of the sort of younger architectures, but also just like I think when we started out the intent, the like, initial Synapse RFQ intent network, there were maybe like 3 to 4 people actually doing solving cross chain, right? Like, and this is like across us, dbridge, et cetera. It was like a very small set of people. Now I think like 10 new solvers are onboarding to Synapse right now. So like I assume there's just like even more that are across all the, the entire ecosystem. So people see the opportunity, right? And it kind of just means it's super early. Like I think there's a lot of sort of interesting stuff to come, and I'm like super excited about it personally.
Yeah, I mean, as order flow increases, there will be more opportunity for solvers to make money, right? Like the swapping market is probably 10 times or 20 times as big as the bridging market in terms of volume. So I feel like this bull market or like the Q4 of this year, Q1 of next year is what the bridging landscape kind of needs for the market volumes to go up and for the solvers to see that there is a bigger opportunity.
Yeah, and the opportunity is already huge, right? Like, some of the biggest bridges will do like billions of dollars in volume
Yeah.
in a month. Like, I think that's plenty of opportunity to capture off the bat. But we also see like a bunch of smaller solvers who are like, using like, thousands of dollars and figured out, how to capture every single transaction below, $100. And so they're just going to do they're going to capture a very small percentage volume of the market, but relative to their capital base, it ends up being, a really high sort of risk-free strategy on it oftentimes. So
Makes sense. I mean, it's just an early market relatively. So I feel like even I've been kind of critical about it in general over the last year, but that's mainly because it's an early market. Like it's not because anybody has a bad intent, like pun intended, but in general it's just developing, right? So I feel like there will be more solvers, there will be more competition, and as there's more order flow, these things will pan out organically. So like talking about solvers and intents, like there's this ERC 7683 standard that's coming up, right? So I was on your profile before this recording, and you had some tweets about like how that standard is maybe not the best, but in general, like we're seeing a lot of adoption for it. Like there's a lot of support for it. So how are you guys looking at it at the moment?
yeah, I mean, I think like me philosophically, I sort of don't like the idea of the proposal. And the main reason is because it's so early in terms of intent-based architecture. There are so many different teams exploring sort of different strategies and different structures that like one, you sort of lock in protocols and not just protocols, but also ecosystems to a specific type of intent, although that might not actually end up in the best user experience, right? So I think like one example of this is like Socket is working on some really interesting things in sort of their intent-based architecture. And they've done some, I think like the general sort of intent structure is like, you have like a sender recipient and then some sort of compact bytes that describes the complexity of what's happening, right? All intents look like that. But you either have a definition that is broad, just like that, so everything falls under it, and thus the definition is not that helpful, or you have something so specific it really like hinders innovation there. And so the thing that I would like to see is like wait for the market to get a bit more mature, because there's just like I think Relay is also doing some really interesting stuff around this. We also have a slightly different intent-based architecture, and a lot of these things in decisions trickle down, like these design decisions trickle down to the user experience, right? So I was talking to some teams and they're like, yeah, our intent-based structure like helps us save on gas. And like it's marginal, but if you're a solver and you're doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume across a year, like this gas savings actually ends up being quite meaningful. So I think like the work that's been done on the proposal has been like really interesting. And we've talked to a lot of the people that are working on it. And I think they're like super smart and competent and know what they're doing. But personally, I would love to see the market get a bit more mature before we sort of lock protocols in and sort of hinder innovation, particularly around this area that's moving so fast, right? Like 6 months ago, intent architectures looks like super different. Like even across V2 wasn't out, right? So there's just like so much sort of, design space to work with where I would love to see that innovation just sort of grow a lot faster.
Makes sense. I mean, so I agree and also disagree at the same time. Like, sure, it's very new, so there will be, uh, I don't know, different protocols, different specs that might be better technically. But I feel like um, this is also sort of the interop token standard kind of a position, right? Like, if we let the market decide, then people complain about the fact that it's a third party standard, and we don't really want a third party standard to kind of be the default in the Ethereum ecosystem. And then right now we have something in the intent landscape and we're saying, okay, let the market decide, right? So I feel like people will have a problem either way. So in a way, the fact that 7683 has so much market support is a way for the market to show its hand, right? Like the market is already deciding that, okay, we don't really care about the small differences, we're just going to go with this. And that's also helpful in many ways, right? Because there are so many teams that are working on intents, and if you talk to anyone, they at least have this one framework as reference that they're like, okay, if we build anything for intents, we're going to make sure that our system is compatible with this standard, right? So it's definitely helpful, but I also see your point. Like, let the market decide. There are so many different projects. It's still new, so maybe there might be some system that's just more gas efficient or like just more expressive, and that's what we need like 5 years down the line.
Yeah, and I think like to even add an add-on here, like if a solution is truly better than whatever standard is implemented, like it will actually outperform the standard, right? So like that is the beautiful thing about crypto is like you can abiding by standards like quite helpful. Like I guess I like don't see that many people not deploying ERC20s or something. But like if there was an alternative that actually is better, then I think like the market is pretty good at finding that and valuing that and using that. So I think like that is the beautiful thing about permissionless deployment is that you can actually deploy anything and still sort of attract users and run and stuff like that. So
yeah, makes sense. I mean, so other than bridging, you guys also have a product for chain abstraction and kind of AI aligned. It's called Cortex, right? And then, are there any other any other products that you guys are working on?
So no other like big things. I think there's like a lot of like sort of micro products within the Synapse ecosystem and also the Cortex ecosystem. But the thing that we're sort of most excited about right now is Cortex. And the reason why is just that the way I've been sort of describing this is like Cortex is the interface for crypto, right? And what I mean by that specifically is like DeFi and crypto has gotten so complicated, and from like a user experience perspective, where you have to click 10 times to approve, bridge, stake, deposit, and then move that somewhere else. And like that user experience is just not that helpful. And then two, I think like DeFi is just complex, right? Like I don't spend all day on Twitter. I look at Twitter quite frequently, and I still feel like I'm out of the loop on a lot of things, right? So for someone that is doing this part-time, it's very hard to say, I actually just want the best yield on my USDC. How do I find that, right? How do I even go about finding those protocols? And Cortex is sort of the sort of intersection of those two ideas that like one, we can move from 10 clicks to 0 clicks, but then we can also sort of empower every single user with intelligence, right? So now you can like actually ask an AI agent, just find the best USDC yield for me, go do it, and sign one transaction, and sort of you have your funds deposited. And then on top of that, you can build several different types of unique agents. And there's some people kind of experimenting in a similar vertical, like virtuals or something. But the idea is like maybe I just like to do the basis trade arb, and I just want to find the best place to do that. You can have an agent to like create a macro strategy and then act on your behalf, right? And then that basically allows like all of us to become just as smart as some like the complex solvers or market makers out there, which is going to be super powerful. So we're like launching a bunch of stuff around that, but I think like a new interface for crypto that is not a wallet is like super, super interesting for users.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so I was just testing out Cortex before, like today, and it was low-key one of the better chain abstraction products I've used. Like, there's so much noise about chain abstraction, but then I was actually so surprised by the fact that Synapse was building one of the better chain abstraction products without all the noise in the ecosystem. And you guys have also incorporated all the new AI stuff, which I feel like people will appreciate more now after having this hype around AI agents, right? Like we had chatbots before, but like now people know how to use an AI XPT sort of a bot, right? Like you were talking about the opportunities. So let's imagine you have an AI XPT type of a bot integrated into your account on Cortex, and then you can just like chat with the bot and figure out what are the highest volume trading pairs on Solana, and then like go about your trade on Cortex through that. So I definitely see the vision, and I feel like after all of this hype around AI agents intense, that's maybe sort of the product that blows up in a year from now. Like people might not appreciate it right now because nobody wants to try new things. Like everybody is busy trading, but 6 months from now, when the noise has gone, people would like appreciate the flexibility and like the convenience.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, everything, the market's going crazy right now, so it's really hard to tell, what are products that have a lot of staying power and really speak to sort of the people that use the chain and stuff today. But part of the thesis of us is just that like AI is really good right now. It's only going to get better. And this will be the way that most people interact with not just crypto and DeFi, but like the internet, right? If you talk to anyone, like my mom uses Chat GPT, and like that like breaks my brain, right? That's not the way that technology typically works. But we sort of think that like in the same way that, you may use like MetaMask or Rabby today, like the way that you'll just interact with DeFi will just like be through an AI agent, right? So that could be the chat. That could be an agent that texts you every morning and says, hey, Bitcoin is down 5%. Do you want to sell all of your bags? Like there's a lot of different features you can build around that like feel less and less like a chat and more like a like personal sort of like financial advisor, right? And we think like that is super interesting and allows people to sort of have intelligence in their pocket, right? Another really cool thing that we're doing there that like I'm personally super excited about is we're doing a lot of cool stuff with account abstraction. Like honestly, like part of building Cortex, I've realized that like the tech has come so far in the past 4 years, and now you can sort of do things that feel a bit more native to my life experience, right? Like rather than like having to deal with like a ledger somewhere and like figuring out how to put that into a hot, et cetera, you can actually just like use your biometrics or something, right? Which like I use my Face ID for other things on my phone, and it just makes sense that I would, if I do that for my bank, that also probably is a decent user experience for me in DeFi, right? Like, it's crazy to me that, so like, I think like 60% of DeFi users like use DeFi on mobile. And like, I will like log into certain websites on mobile and I'm like, this thing does not, like, it just does not work, right? So there's so many different cool user experiencing things that you can do around sort of the intersection of AI, account abstraction, and a lot of other cool things that like the base layer innovation has kind of allowed for. And that's where we want to be, right? We want to empower DeFi users and really build products that are, they will use.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the innovation is definitely there. The tech is there. People are just not used to the workflows, right? Like even me as a user, I'm not used to the account abstraction workflow. Like I'm used to going to my wallet and then doing things, right? Like that's just the mental model that I have for using the crypto ecosystem in general. But that will change at some point. Like even with the AI agents, when ChatGPT launched, nobody knew how to use it or like how to integrate ChatGPT into their like daily life. But then now we can't live without it, right? Like there's no day that goes by where we don't use ChatGPT. So I feel like all of these changes will come at some point, but they require some very habit breaking kind of a moment. I don't know what that moment will be, maybe, but I feel like the tech is definitely improving.
Yeah, and like I'm sure you've heard this just as much as I have in the past year, where everyone's asking like, where are the apps at? And I think the apps are like here, they're just hard to use, right? Like Athena is an awesome protocol, right? It does some really novel stuff. It's super interesting, but you like log onto the website and there's like 13 different things going on. You're like, how do I even start to think about using this? And so I think like a lot of the pressure is on simplifying that for people that are not DeFi degens or DeFi native. How do someone like that interact with it? And AI sort of gives you the tools to do that, right?
I mean, it's because it's all financial apps, right? So a lot of people just have the barrier towards like, okay, I don't really understand lending and borrowing, so I'm not gonna get into this. So how are you guys kind of promoting and positioning Cortex?
Yeah, so I think like there is natural sort of synergies between Synapse and Cortex, and that is one of the things that we have tried to communicate. And the way that I think to simplify this is like Cortex is the interface, and Synapse Intent Network is the execution layer, right? Because intent networks are really good at dealing with that complexity and executing it, but sometimes translating whatever the user's desire is into something that is structured that a blockchain or solver can read is difficult, right? Like sometimes it's hard for me to explain, like, what do I even want to trade on chain? What do I think is interesting? What are the types of protocols that I trust? And so AI and AI agents are really good at understanding those sort of user sort of desires, while the intents are really good at expressing or executing the user sort of requests. With that being said, I think like one of the big unlocks for us is tapping into a lot of these sort of places where users live on chain, right? I think 3 years ago that looked very different. You had everything from like Axie Infinity to DeFi Kingdoms to different games and different places. That user profile looks totally different now, right? I think I saw some stats today where World Chain is onboarding like 750,000 people like a week or something, right? And that number is like, that's like fast. How do we onboard the next, 10 million, 100 million people? Like that is where that's happening. So things like a world app is actually super interesting, right? There are apps today with that are used by millions of people. So I think like figuring out the intersection of DeFi, but then also people that are being onboarded is super crucial, which means that like mobile is super important, right? Having accessibility to different languages is super important. Figuring out P2P payments within Telegram is super important because these are where users live today. So when you talk about, I think, sort of growth and promotion and sort of how we're thinking about it, this is like a DeFi app for DeFi users, but we want to make it as simple as possible, like so simple your mom could use it, and that's kind of the goal there.
So like, I mean, so we started off by talking a lot about bridges and then kind of went into intents and AI and now onboarding normies to crypto in a way, right? So like, what would you say is the Synapse end game? Like, is it more bridging related, or bridging is of course the rails or like the infra that you need to support a Cortex type of product, right? But like, how are you guys seeing your time being prioritized today? Is it more on the Cortex side, or is it more on the intent execution, like building that layer out, or like how are you guys kind of dividing time and resources today?
Yeah, I think in terms of how we're dividing time and resources, it's half and half, right? So I think like in the same way that the Fed has a dual mandate, which they may or may not follow, I think our dual mandate right now is like one, provide the best bridging experience, and so that means iterating on the intent network as best as possible. And then the second thing is building Cortex, and so being sort of the best product in the AI sort of crypto space, and really building a user-facing product that is used by DeFi power users. And so that's sort of the dual mandate there. Philosophically, how I think this plays out is I think like the two end up merging together, and you have this sort of I guess like execution layer, which is Synapse, and the interface layer, which is Cortex, and both of those will manifest in several different ways, right? So like the like intent architecture will get super sophisticated and continue to evolve, and the interface layer will be a web app, it'll be a mobile app, it'll be a world app, it'll be in Telegram, etc. And I think like those two things sort of merge together and start to feel like one experience. Like, I think there are very few people that care about intent architecture and how that actually looks. But there are a lot of people that interact with financial apps every single day, right? And so those two things cater to very different people, but both are like part of this larger narrative of like, how do we actually build something interesting at the intersection of AI and crypto?
Mhm. Okay, makes sense. I think I see the plan much better now. Like I see the vision. So like, okay, I'm done with all the synapse and bridging questions. To the bull market right now. So while we're recording, the Pengu drop is happening, right? So how are you kind of positioning yourself for the bull market right now?
This is a great question. Maybe not well enough actually, since I haven't retired yet. But there's so many interesting things going on. I think like the AI hype is something that I like track a lot. Like this sort of AI agent bots on Twitter are super fascinating to me. Virtuals, I feel like launches a new product every single day.
Yeah.
And so some of the things in that ecosystem are just like, some are more interesting than others, but like the shipping rate and sort of iteration rate is so interesting. I guess like some of the things that are super interesting to me is like one, Hyperliquid is actually the best trading experience on chain, and like every cycle there's a new venue where it has the best trading. In 2021 I think every single trader that I knew talked about how FTX margining system was like something super creative and novel and the best thing to ever exist. Turns out the margining system was not great, but but it was it was like one of the biggest crypto companies of the cycle, right? So I think like the Hyperliquid stuff, the team has absolutely crushed it there, and I'm excited to see how that plays out. Hopefully my round 2 airdrop will be bigger. Who knows? And then I think I think the NFT space, or actually no, I changed my mind. I think the RWA space is something that is going to be super interesting this time around because now that there's sort of more institutional players paying attention, I think like conversations around like CBDCs, like sort of on-chain gold, things like that are just like much more interesting. I don't know if this is going to be anybody's like 100,000 bagger, but like it is the thing that I think will like I guess improve people's perspective on crypto the most and be the most impactful to sort of the larger thesis of like why crypto and like anti-censorship are super important. So I'm excited about those two things. I'll show you my bags personally later. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so my hot take for the RWA sector is that the interop protocols are actually better positioned to help institutions tokenize, and we're already seeing it happen, right? Like if you look at Layer Zero, Axelar, Wormhole, Chainlink, like they're all working with institutions and they are tokenizing their products through these projects. So I feel like the interop protocols are out to eat RWA protocols cake in a way, and we will see it play out. I feel like it's already happening, but it will become more and more obvious. Just like my 2 cents on that.
I like that take because I can sort of see the logic behind it, but I'm curious if interop protocols are the best positioned to take advantage of that.
I mean, I feel like they are. I'm probably biased, but I don't know. I feel like there's more work to be done there because that's more of a BD thing if you think about it. Like, how do you position yourself? How do you market yourself to institutions? And then, like, if anyone wants to tokenize anything or even build something in crypto today, they either have to select like one chain to do it. Like, let's say you want to just tokenize something on Ethereum or Solana, then it's a different product. Like, you probably don't need anything other than just like Ethereum. But then nobody thinks about crypto as just one chain today. Like everybody thinks about Ethereum and Solana, plus maybe a few L2s, right? So as soon as you start thinking about multiple chains, there are only so many options that you can go with.
Interesting. Because it seemed like the narrative last time around was that chains are the best people to do this sort of RWA
Maybe.
stuff. Now it does make sense, right? Because you can't siloing yourself as an RWA is like not helpful because liquidity is just so deep on all these chains. So you kind of have to be multi-chain.
Yeah, I mean, chains will also play a big role, of course, because in a way, these are the teams with the biggest treasuries, right? And you need a BD army to actually go after institutions, like go talk to everyone, explain the vision of crypto. Like you have to sell crypto. You're not even selling your product; you're selling crypto. So it's a very big undertaking, and of course, chains will have to be there. Interop protocols will be there, and a lot of like RWA projects will work together. I just have a feeling like all of these will come together at some point, and yeah, like we will see a lot of work being done there.
Yeah, and the interesting part about this is you either work with the interop protocols now or you work with them later.
Yeah.
Because if the product is successful, it's gonna have to be multi-chain. So it's up to them.
Yeah, you can't really avoid going to another chain, right? Like you have to expand because the liquidity is just moving that way. So it's interesting. Like I feel like interop protocols in general, like Synapse or the entire ecosystem, is in a very interesting position right now because there are so many chains. So even if you love bridges or hate bridges, you can't really actually ignore them.
It's impossible. And like I think one of the most fun sort of things to think about in crypto is that the chains are deploying at a rate that the bridges can't integrate them all, right? Like I think like layer zero is really good at integrating new bridges, and there's just like stuff they can't even get to, right? Because there's just like these new L2s all the time. And I mean, shout out to the ecosystems that made this a possibility, right? Like OP Stack is crushing it, right? But it makes fragmentation a bit more prescient because now there's a lot more opportunities to fragment liquidity and users.
Yeah, yeah. I will be definitely going into an interesting period for interop protocols in 2025. And yeah, like thanks a lot for the chat. I feel like this was a good brief or like a primer on Synapse and how you guys are building. And I love your community and also your products. Like the fact that you guys are DeFi users actually shows in the products because even from a support perspective, like all the DeFi degens kind of use Synapse, and you can tell by who's talking about Synapse on Twitter, right? So yeah, like all the best to you guys, and thanks a lot for your time.
I appreciate it, and thank you for inviting me. You have the best content in the interop space, so we're all trying to be like you.
Awesome.